The first thing you notice at a Manhattan charity gala isn't the chandeliers, or the way the light fractures off crystal flutes, or even the hush that ripples through a room when someone truly important walks in. The first thing you notice is the chill. Not the temperature, though air conditioning is always dialed just above shiver level to protect the wine, but the kind that lingers in the air between women and diamonds. It hangs like mist above the velvet carpet, mingling with laughter and the faintest scent of Chanel. It's the kind of cold that you can't see, but you feel from the second you step into the foyer, and every carefully made-up face turns just slightly, just long enough to clock the name, the dress, the date on your arm, the place card in your hand. The Astoria Children's Hospital Spring Gala, a night for the best and brightest, where tickets cost more than most people's rent, and invitations are whispered about for weeks. This is where the old money, the new money, and the wish they were money gather to jostle for space under the marble rotunda. I remember standing just outside the revolving glass doors, hands steady at my sides, willing them not to betray the nervous spark in my chest. I'd chosen midnight blue silk for the evening, a column dress by Alexander McQueen, classic but with a plunging back, the fabric pooling just so around my heels. Simone Patel, my friend since university, said it made me look expensive but not desperate. I liked that. I wanted to look like I belonged, but I was old enough to know that belonging had very little to do with a price tag, and everything to do with the people who measured you. Inside, the Astoria Hotel's ballroom had been transformed. Votives flickered on every surface, peonies and white orchids spilled from glass vases as tall as small children, and everywhere, strings of tiny lights twined overhead, glinting off the domed ceiling. Waiters in black jackets floated through the crowd with champagne, their faces as blank and unobtrusive as museum docents. It was all perfectly choreographed and perfectly cold. Simone was already waiting for me near the staircase, slim and radiant in scarlet. She waved, balancing a flute in one hand and a smile in the other. "Cass, over here!" A few heads turned. I felt it, the flicker, the pause. My entrance was marked, cataloged, and evaluated. I'd done this enough to know the drill. My last name, Whitmore, was old enough to open doors, but not so old as to be untouchable. My family's name didn't conjure up railroads or oil or banking fortunes from the Gilded Age, but it was there, in the archives, in the registry, attached to trust funds and art donations and board seats. Just enough to be noticed, never quite enough to be above suspicion. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, I was here not just as a guest, but as a sponsor. At least, that's what Patricia Kingsley, chair of the Gala committee, had told me when she'd called in March, her voice honeyed with anticipation, already picturing my family's name on the donor wall. "Cassie, darling, your foundation's support this year is simply invaluable, truly." She didn't mention that my invitation had been lost the year before, when a rival family's daughter had been offered the honorary chair instead. None of that mattered tonight. I was determined to enjoy myself, to do what my mother used to call smile and glide, a trick she taught me as a girl, to walk through crowds as if I'd already won them. Simone met me halfway up the stairs, taking my hand, squeezing. "You ready?" she murmured. "As I'll ever be," I said, willing my voice to stay light. "Just keep your chin up. Remember, half these people couldn't find the restroom without their publicist." I laughed, letting her warmth steady me. We entered the ballroom together, and for a moment, it felt like any other night. Music drifted from a string quartet tucked beneath the spiral staircase, glasses chimed, and the low roar of conversation washed over us. For a heartbeat, I belonged. Then came the voices, sharp, low, pitched just for me. "That's Cassandra Whitmore. Didn't she used to work for that gallery downtown? I heard she rents. The dress, the car, everything. Her parents left her nothing, you know, all show, not a real heiress." The voices were always there, like static beneath the music, little snickers and sighs that had followed me from prep school to Princeton to every party since. I'd learned to ignore them most of the time. Tonight, they felt closer, sharper, like the edge of a knife pressed just below the skin. Patricia swept over to greet us, her navy gown shimmering under the lights, diamonds at her ears and throat. Her smile was the kind that could slice glass. "Cassandra, so glad you made it." She didn't look at Simone. "I see you brought a friend." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Patricia's eyes flicked over my dress, pausing at the clutch, the earrings, genuine sapphire, though I knew she'd assumed they were borrowed. "We're so grateful for your support," she murmured, just loud enough for the women at her elbow, Serena Vaughn and Chloe Barrington, to hear. "Your foundation's generosity means the world to us. Of course, in times like these, every little bit helps." Chloe's lips curled. "I just adore your dress, Cassie. Is it one of those new rental sites? I'm thinking of trying them. So much more practical, don't you think?" Her tone was honeyed venom, each word landing softly, but meaning everything. Serena snickered, her laughter hidden behind a flute of Veuve Clicquot. I felt the flush rising in my cheeks, but kept my smile in place. "Actually, it's a McQueen original, a gift from a dear friend," I said. Serena's eyes gleamed. "Must be nice. Some of us have to buy our own." I almost pitied her, the desperation beneath the sarcasm, the way she clung to Patricia's shadow. Almost. Patricia leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do hope you'll join the other sponsors at the head table. You know how important these things are, visibility and all, and I believe you'll want to be front and center when we announce tonight's donations." Her meaning was clear. Don't embarrass us. Don't come up short. I nodded, the ice settling deeper in my bones. As the evening unfolded, I found myself drifting from conversation to conversation, always on the edge, never quite inside the circle, never quite out. The men talked stocks and city council races, the women compared ski trips and renovations. Simone tried to pull me into a discussion about the silent auction, but Serena and Chloe blocked her path, their laughter sharp, eyes sliding past us as if we were invisible. I tried to focus on the cause, the children, the hospital, the reason I'd agreed to be here, but the whispers kept coming, circling like wolves. "Did you see her last year? Tried to bid on the Basquiat, but didn't even make the minimum." "I heard her trust funds all tied up. She lives off whatever she can squeeze from her lawyer." "She's not real money, not like us." Each word landed heavier than the last. I wanted to walk out, to disappear, but I stayed. Pride, stubbornness, something rooted deeper than either. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Never let them see you run." Dinner was called just before 8. Waiters swept through the ballroom, collecting flutes, directing guests to their tables with the kind of efficiency that only comes from old money and a decade of practice. Simone and I found our place cards at the far end of the head table, closer to the doors than the stage. Patricia, Serena, and Chloe clustered at the center, surrounding a hedge fund billionaire and the mayor's wife. As salads were served, Serena leaned across the white linen, her voice syrupy. "So, Cassie, I read in Town and Country that your family's estate in the Hamptons is on the market. Downsizing?" I smiled politely, just simplifying. My father always said, "A house is only as good as the memories you make in it." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Or the ones you rent out to pay the bills." Laughter rippled around the table. Simone bristled, but I put a hand on her arm, a silent plea to let it go. Patricia lifted her glass. "To new friends and old families." Everyone sipped, eyes on me. The first course passed in a haze. The conversation swirled around me, plans for Aspen, the latest gallery openings, whispered rumors about who'd been left off the guest list. I felt myself shrinking, folding in on the edges, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down. Then came the auction. A line of servers appeared, holding velvet trays with preview cards for each item. Serena made a show of peering at the card in front of me. Oh, the Cartier Panther bracelet. I'm sure that would look stunning with your dress, Cassie. Are you bidding? Chloe chimed in. Careful, darling. Minimum's 100 grand. Wouldn't want to end up in a headline. I forced a laugh, my hands icy in my lap. Simone leaned in, whispering, You don't have to take this. But I did, and I would. The auctioneer took the stage, his voice rolling over the crowd, practiced and warm. Bidding started high, $50,000 for a weekend at Lake Placid, $120,000 for a private dinner with a celebrity chef. The room came alive, paddles flashing, numbers flying. Patricia announced the next item. A weekend at the Whitmore Family Lodge in Lake George, generously donated by Cassandra Whitmore herself. Applause, polite, restrained. Serena clapped her hands. Oh, Cassie, I had no idea you still owned that place. I heard it was under new management. Her meaning was clear. I swallowed hard. The bidding climbed 30,000, 35,000, 40,000. Chloe turned to Patricia. I wonder if it comes with a tour of the garage sale. Laughter. My pulse hammered in my ears. It was too much. I set down my fork, carefully, letting my hand steady itself on the white linen. I felt a strange calm settle, a hollow kind of peace that comes just before the storm. I excused myself from the table, murmuring something about needing air. Simone tried to follow, but I waved her off, needing space. Outside the ballroom, the hallway was quiet. The click of my heels echoed off marble. I pulled my phone from my clutch, fingers numb, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I'd saved for moments just like this. Evelyn Hart. My trust manager, my guardian angel, if angels wore Armani and never missed a decimal. I dialed. She picked up on the second ring. Cassie? Evelyn, I said, voice low. Are you still at the hotel? I'm in the lobby. Is everything all right? I looked back through the glass doors at the crowd, at Serena and Chloe, still laughing, at Patricia, holding court. They're calling me a fake, I said quietly. They think I'm here on borrowed time. Silence on the line, then a quiet steal. Do you want me to come up? I took a breath, steady and deep. Yes, I think it's time. She understood. She always did. I waited, watching the ballroom doors. A waiter passed, glancing at me with the careful concern of someone trained never to ask questions. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my dress. I thought of my mother, the parties she used to throw, the way she'd walk into a room like she owned it, because she did. Within minutes, Evelyn appeared at the end of the hall, immaculate as always, silver hair pulled back, navy suit sharp as a blade. She was the kind of woman who could silence a boardroom with a glance. Tonight, she looked ready for battle. She joined me, eyes calm, searching. Are you sure? I nodded. She slipped an arm through mine, maternal, but with a power that could move mountains. Together, we walked back into the ballroom. Inside, the auction had reached its peak. The crowd buzzed, glasses clinked, and the band played something soft and forgettable. No one noticed us at first. But as we approached the head table, voices faltered and laughter died. Patricia looked up, eyes narrowing. Serena's smile slipped, just a hair. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear and carrying across the room. Excuse me, may I have your attention, please? The room stilled. Patricia blinked, taken aback. Evelyn, what is this? Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that says, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'd like to make an announcement on behalf of Miss Whitmore and the Whitmore Foundation. Serena snorted, under her breath. Here we go. Evelyn's gaze flicked to her, cool, dismissive. As many of you know, the Astoria Children's Hospital has benefited for years from the generosity of donors in this room. Tonight, however, marks a new chapter. She turned to me, inviting me forward. I felt every eye in the room on me, some gleaming with anticipation, others with skepticism. Evelyn continued, her voice ringing with authority. Miss Whitmore's foundation is proud to sponsor this year's gala, underwriting all event costs and pledging a $1 million donation to the hospital's pediatric oncology unit. This contribution, effective immediately, ensures that every dollar raised tonight will go directly to the children who need it most. For a moment, the silence was total, a stunned, gaping, breathless quiet. Then the cameras began to flash. Reporters, real and amateur alike, scrambled for their phones. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, speechless. Serena froze, her flute half raised, eyes wide. Evelyn turned to me, nodding. I stepped forward, my voice steady, soft, but carrying through the hush. "I'd like to dedicate this gift," I said, "to those who uplift rather than belittle, to the children and to everyone in this room who knows that generosity isn't measured by the size of your fortune, but by the strength of your heart." There it was, my mother's voice, my father's lessons, all those years of being doubted, distilled into a single, elegant moment. Flashbulbs erupted. The applause started slowly. Simone, of course, first to stand, then spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the room was on its feet. Even Patricia managed a stunned, stilted smile. Serena and Chloe were stone still, caught mid-sip, as if hoping the floor might open and swallow them whole. I stood beneath the lights, heart pounding, chin lifted, letting the moment settle. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a tantrum. I had simply let the truth speak for itself, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. As the applause echoed through the ballroom, I turned to Evelyn. She met my gaze, her eyes warm. "You did well, Cassie," she murmured. I smiled, letting the applause wash over me. Not for the money, not for the attention, but for the knowledge that finally I had claimed my place. No one would ever question my name or my worth again. The cameras kept flashing. The headlines would write themselves by morning. But for now, I stood, surrounded by 1,000 lights, the taste of vindication as rich as the champagne. I had come into the night as a question mark. I would leave it as an exclamation point. And somewhere, beneath the applause and the music, I felt that cold mist begin to lift, just a little. If you want to understand how a single night in a marble ballroom can hold the weight of a lifetime, you have to start long before the cameras, before the whispers, before the women in couture drew their invisible lines in the air. You have to step back through corridors lined with family portraits, through endless halls of private schools, and the polished glass of city high-rises that glint with power by day and echo with silence at night. Because the real story of any heiress, the truth behind every carefully chosen dress and every calm practiced smile, doesn't begin with the invitation. It begins with the inheritance, not just of money, but of memory, reputation, and 1,000 tiny battles fought in places no one else sees. For me, it began in a house on the Upper East Side, on a block so quiet you could hear the clip of a doorman's shoes long after midnight. Whitmore House was not the grandest or oldest on the block. Ours was a quiet sort of money, built not from robber barons or shipping empires, but from 3 generations of relentless striving. My great-grandfather's law practice, my grandfather's investment firm, my mother's ability to transform a crumbling brownstone into a sanctuary. There was no gold leaf, no marble pillars, just old mahogany, soft rugs, and the scent of books in every room. My mother, Catherine Whitmore, was the real architect of my world. She was not a socialite, though she'd attended every debutante ball in Manhattan. She was not a business mogul, though her art gallery in Chelsea was whispered about in the Times. She taught me how to paint with watercolors on rainy afternoons and how to hold my head high when the world seemed designed to make you small. She showed me how to command a room, never with volume, but with presence. To this day, I remember the way she entered a party,
not sweeping, not eager, but steady, every inch of her radiating quiet assurance. My father, Richard Whitmore, was a different lesson. Reserved, deliberate, a man whose name could open doors and whose handshake closed deals. I saw little of him during the week. He left before dawn, returned after dark. But he was present in other ways. In the disciplined order of our lives, in the way he insisted I learn chess, not checkers, and in his unspoken belief that anything less than excellence was not an option. He loved me, I know, but in the way of men who equate love with provision, who show devotion through trust funds and carefully worded advice about stocks.
By the time I was 7, I understood that my family was different. Not just because our driver waited outside the school gates in a black sedan, or because the Whitmore meme made teachers stand a little straighter, but because there was a kind of loneliness in being watched so closely. Every birthday party was an event, every report card a press release, every mistake a lesson, dissected at the dinner table. My mother softened the edges, baking cookies with me at midnight, letting me hide in her office during parties, but there was no escaping the scrutiny. Private school came next, Chapin, then Brarely, where uniforms were pressed and hair was always parted just so. The other girls learned early how to spot weakness: the knockoff bag, the wrong accent, a parent in the wrong industry. My last name bought me space, but not immunity. I was, for a time, the art girl, not serious enough, not hungry enough for Harvard or Yale. I had friends, but never a pack. Even then, I preferred the company of books, of paintings, of quiet corners where I could be myself. The first time someone called me fake was in 7th grade. It was over something stupid, a field trip to the Met, a pair of shoes that, in hindsight, were not the right brand. "She probably got them at Macy's," one girl hissed, just loud enough for me to hear. I pretended not to care, but I went home and asked my mother why people hated what they didn't understand. She smoothed my hair, her hands gentle, and told me something I never forgot. "Jealousy always finds a reason, Tass. Your job isn't to give them less to envy. It's to give them nothing to wound you with." By high school, I had learned the rhythms of society, the right causes to support, the right colleges to visit, the right boys to date for just long enough, never too long. My life moved to a script written long before I was born, but I chafed against it. I wanted more. More than tea parties and debut balls. More than the hollow pride of a last name. It was around this time that my father began to talk about responsibility. "Your trust is not a toy, Cassandra. It is a legacy, your legacy. Someday, you'll have to decide how to use it." I listened, half bored, half awed. I wanted to be a painter, or maybe a writer. Money seemed abstract, something I'd always have, something that came with limits and lectures and conditions. I didn't realize how quickly that could change. The change came all at once. My mother's cancer was discovered too late. She was gone in less than a year, her absence swallowing our house whole. My father withdrew further into his work, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to have everything and nothing at once. Money could buy the best doctors, the quietest rooms, the rarest medicines. It could not buy time, or kindness, or the sense that you truly belonged. I graduated high school with honors, but no real joy. I went to Princeton because it was expected, another notch on a belt I hadn't asked for. At university, I tried to reinvent myself. I joined the art society, volunteered at the local shelter, and dated a boy from Connecticut who had never set foot on the Upper East Side. For a while, I believed I could become someone else, someone who was measured by effort, not by inheritance. But the world is small, and the world is watchful. No matter how far I ran, my last name caught up with me. When my father died, 3 weeks before my 22nd birthday, I was thrust back into the orbit of lawyers and accountants and family friends who spoke in careful, coded language about transitions and the future. Suddenly, I was the sole heir to the Whitmore estate, a fortune built over 3 generations, now resting on my uncertain shoulders. That's when I met Evelyn Hart.
She arrived at my apartment, barely furnished, a hasty retreat from campus, one rainy Monday in March. She introduced herself as the Whitmore Family Trust's lead manager, handed me her card, and sat, perfectly composed, on my thrifted sofa. "Cassandra, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to help you understand what you've inherited and how to protect it." I nodded, still numb from loss. She explained the terms of my trust. Yearly distributions tied to charitable giving and professional milestones. Restrictions designed to keep me from squandering it, but flexible enough to allow me to live as I chose, if I chose wisely.
An entire foundation, the Whitmore Foundation, devoted to education, the arts, and healthcare. I was now its public face. I was overwhelmed. I was 22 and alone, a princess in a kingdom I didn't want. I thought about selling everything, disappearing, finding a way to start over without the baggage of expectation. But Evelyn saw something in me, some echo of my mother's fire. She taught me how to read the ledgers, how to negotiate contracts, how to turn a no into a yes in board meetings full of men who barely looked up from their phones. She never coddled, never patronized. She was relentless, sharp, and fiercely protective. Over time, she became more than a manager. She became my compass. It was Evelyn who suggested I put my name forward for the Astoria Hospital Gala Committee. "Visibility is important, Cassie. You need to own your place at the table." I balked. "Those women, they eat people like me for breakfast." She smiled, the faintest hint of pride in her eyes. "And you know how to dine with lions." For years, I stayed on the periphery, attending galas, signing checks, keeping my head down. I watched as other women, Serena Vaughn, Chloe Barrington, moved through rooms like they owned the air. They laughed, they whispered, they curated their circles with a precision that would have impressed a surgeon. They never let me forget I was alone. Rumors, always, about my father's business dealings, about my mother's gallery, about whether I had real money or just enough to look the part. The phrase fake heiress began to cling to me, a shroud woven by envy and boredom. I tried to ignore it, but it found its way into every conversation, every introduction, every sidelong glance at my clothes or my car or my apartment. People think money makes you immune to pain. They are wrong. It only changes the currency. It turns slights into scars that don't heal, turns laughter into weapons. The worst part wasn't the whispers from strangers. It was the slow erosion of trust. Old friends, girls I'd known since childhood, began to fade away, replaced by acquaintances who wanted invitations, introductions, favors. Men who called when tickets to the Met Gala were at stake, or when their business ventures needed just a small introduction. I learned to guard myself, to keep my circle small. Simone, my one true friend from university, Evelyn, my silent sentinel, and a few kind souls from my mother's old world, artists and teachers who saw the person, not the bank account. Sometimes I wanted to run, to trade it all for a normal life, anonymous, unremarkable, unburdened. But then I'd remember my mother's words, "Never let them see you run." I began to use my position, quietly at first. I funded scholarships at my old high school, donated art supplies to underfunded schools, sponsored summer camps for kids who couldn't afford them. I kept my name off the donor lists, not out of modesty, but out of a desire to do good without being seen as grasping for praise. It didn't matter. The rumors persisted. She's hiding something. She's desperate for attention. Real heiresses don't have to prove themselves. It was only a matter of time before the whispers made their way to the Astoria Gala. I remember the first time Patricia Kingsley called, inviting me to coffee at the Mark. She was all gracious smiles and gentle flattery, her every question a test. "We'd love to see the Whitmore name more visible in the community, Cassie. You know how important appearances are, especially these days." I smiled, matching her tone, promising to think about it. Later, Evelyn asked how it went. "Like being asked to audition for a part I was born to play, but never wanted," I said. But I agreed. I always agreed.
out of duty, out of hope, out of some twisted desire to finally belong. That's how I ended up at the head table this year, how my name landed on the sponsor's plaque, how every woman in the room sharpened her claws. I was a target, but also a mirror for their own insecurities. Every compliment carried a hidden blade. Nice to see you out and about, Cassie. Is it your dress or did you just lose weight? We missed you at the charity luncheon. Too busy these days? I heard you're consulting for that new art gallery. Must be nice to have a little project. Each jab reminded me that, in their world, I would always be almost one of them, almost good enough, almost real.
Still, I kept showing up. I kept writing checks. I kept building more Mother's Foundation, quietly funding more programs, more clinics, more scholarships. I let them think what they wanted. I knew the truth would speak for itself one day. That day arrived, sooner and more spectacularly than I could have imagined. When the headlines about the gala hit the society pages the next morning, the narrative shifted. Fake heiress stuns Manhattan elite with million-dollar gift. Cassandra Whitmore claims her place at the top. From outcast to icon, the night Cassie Whitmore made them eat their words. Evelyn called me early, her voice softer than usual. Cassie, you've done more than just prove them wrong. You've changed the story. I listened, not quite believing it. For so long, I'd let others define me. Now, for the first time, I had the pen. That afternoon, a delivery arrived at my apartment, a single peony in a glass vase with a note. For the girl who learned to dine with lions, love, Mom. Of course, my mother was long gone. I knew Evelyn had sent it, but I let myself believe, for a moment, that somewhere, somehow, the woman who taught me how to walk into any room with my head high was watching, that she saw what I had become, that she knew I'd finally stopped running. The morning after the gala, I woke to sunlight, filtering through linen curtains and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. My ears still rang with applause, but my heart felt oddly still. I sat in bed, knees hugged to my chest, and let the tide of notifications wash over me. Texts from acquaintances, emails from society writers, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled, numb and disbelieving, as my name flickered in and out of headlines. Heiress shocks high society with million-dollar gift. Cassie Whitmore shuts down doubters at Astoria Gala. The night Manhattan learned a lesson in grace. Some articles were kind, some gleeful, a few snide in that backhanded way of the city's gossip columns. But the story was out. The verdict, at least for now, was on my side. And yet, as the world spun around me, I felt neither triumph nor relief, only a soft, wary ache, as if the victory I'd been handed wasn't truly mine until I understood what it meant. Simone called first, her voice breathless, laughter spilling through the phone. "Cass, you did it. You should see Serena's face. I think she's hiding under a rock, assuming she can fit her ego in with her." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "I didn't do it for her," I said, "or any of them." "I know," Simone replied, her tone suddenly gentle, "but you did it for you. That matters." For the rest of the morning, I let myself drift, answering messages in batches, deleting the worst, and saving the ones that mattered. Old friends reappeared, eager to share in the glow. Former classmates, distant relatives, even ex-boyfriends sent congratulatory notes, thinly veiled as invitations to reconnect. I ignored them all. Instead, I called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. "Cassie, did I do the right thing?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. She was silent for a moment, weighing her reply. "You did what was necessary. Sometimes necessity and rightness aren't the same, but last night they were." I let the words settle, grounding myself in her calm. By noon, the gossip cycle had moved into overdrive. Photos from the gala, my face under the spotlights, Serena's shock frozen mid-sip, Evelyn at my side were everywhere. Fashion blogs dissected my dress, finance writers speculated about the foundation's endowment.
A reporter from the New York Times left a message with my doorman, asking for an interview. I declined. That afternoon, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, Patricia Kingsley stood in the hallway, flanked by a photographer and a sheepish assistant. Her smile was tight, the lines at her mouth deeper than I'd ever seen. "Cassandra," she said, "do you have a moment? We'd love a photo for the hospital's next newsletter." I glanced at the camera, then back at Patricia, remembering every snide aside, every microaggression hidden under the gloss of her hospitality. For a heartbeat, I considered slamming the door. But instead, I smiled. "Of course, Patricia. Anything for the children." We posed, shoulder to shoulder, the photographer snapping away, as if we'd always been friends. When the assistant handed me a bouquet, Patricia leaned in, her voice barely a whisper.
"You really surprised us last night." "Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you don't expect," I replied, holding her gaze until she looked away. When they left, I put the flowers in the trash. In the weeks that followed, the air around me changed. I was no longer invisible, nor was I quite the curiosity I'd been before. Everywhere I went, doors opened a little wider, smiles grew a little warmer, and the same women who had once whispered now sought me out for advice. Chloe Barrington sent an apology, a sleek, embossed card with the faintest hint of perfume. "Cassie, sorry if I was out of line at the gala. Would love to have coffee, just us girls." I tossed it in a drawer, unread. Serena Vaughn, ever the survivor, managed a reinvention. She posted photos from a wellness retreat in Sedona, captioned with hashtags about self-care and growth. She never mentioned me directly, but her absence at every event for the next 3 months was its own kind of capitulation. Simone, on the other hand, became my shield and my mirror. She walked with me into every room, laughing brightly, never letting me shrink from the spotlight. "Let them stare," she whispered, looping her arm through mine. "You're the only story they'll remember, anyway." But the real change was quieter and far more profound. After years of feeling like a guest in my own life, I began to claim my space. I started attending board meetings in person, not just as a figurehead, but as a participant. I challenged the old guard at the Whitmore Foundation, pushing for more transparency, more risk, more heart. I met with the directors of the Astoria Children's Hospital, not in a ballroom, but in the pediatric oncology ward, where the $1 million donation was already funding a new playroom, a quiet space for parents, and an art therapy program that made children smile despite IVs and bandages. In those halls, no one cared about last names. No one whispered about borrowed dresses. There was only need and the quiet grace of giving. I sat with mothers, holding their hands as they waited for test results. I colored with little boys who'd lost their hair, their laughter echoing down sterile corridors. For the first time, my money felt like more than a shield. It felt like a gift. And in those moments, the word heiress stopped feeling like a curse and started to feel like a calling. But not everything changed overnight. Manhattan's social world is nothing if not tenacious. And next season brought new galas, new committees, and new invitations scrawled in looping script. Some things were different. I was courted by causes that had once shunned me. Board chairs asked me to headline fundraisers. PR firms offered to manage my image. Even the fashion editors who had critiqued my style now asked for interviews. But beneath the surface, the same old games played out. At the opening of the Whitney's new exhibit, I overheard 2 young women, daughters of Wall Street titans, dissecting the guest list. "She's only here because of that hospital stunt," one said, nodding toward me. "Please, at least she gave real money, not like the rest of us," her friend replied, smirking. I sipped my wine and turned away. Their words stung, but not like before. I understood, finally, that nothing you do will ever be enough for those committed to misunderstanding you. What mattered was what I did next. The real test came 6 weeks after the gala, at an event I almost skipped. The Central Park Conservancy's annual garden party was the kind of affair my mother had loved. Outdoors, casual, the city's elite trading evening gowns for linen sundresses and wide-brimmed hats. I hadn't planned to go, but Simone insisted.
You can't hide now, Cass. Besides, they'll miss you if you don't show. I relented, letting her pick my dress, a simple white shift, flats, no jewelry, but a silver bangle my mother had worn to her own last party. When we arrived, the mood was lighter, the laughter real. I let myself relax, breathing in the scent of cut grass and peonies, watching children run wild while their parents tried, and failed, to keep up. Patricia found me by the lemonade table. "Cassandra, there you are. We were hoping you'd come." She smiled, less guarded than before, but still wary. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did at the gala. The hospital is thriving." I nodded, accepting the praise but letting it pass through me. "I hear you're funding a new arts program in Harlem," she ventured, her tone gentle, even a little curious. "I am," I replied. "My mother believed in giving kids a place to express themselves. I'm just following her lead."
Patricia's eyes softened. "You know, Catherine was always the brightest in the room. You remind me of her more every year." For the first time, I believed her. As we talked, I noticed Serena on the far edge of the lawn, her posture stiffer, her smile more brittle. She caught my eye, then looked away, busying herself with a group of newcomers. I felt a pang of old pain, then let it go. There was nothing left between us but memory. Simone nudged me, eyes sparkling. "Come on, Cass, they're about to start the auction. Let's see what happens when you're the one holding the paddle this time." I laughed, following her into the crowd. The auction was informal, a picnic basket here, a weekend in Nantucket there. When the final item was announced, a week-long artist retreat for local teenagers, I raised my paddle without hesitation. The room quieted, eyes on me, waiting for the punchline. But this time, there was only applause. Afterward, as I signed the donation form, a woman I'd never met, a teacher from the Bronx, hair pulled back, hands ink-stained, came over to thank me. "My students have never even seen Central Park," she said, tears in her eyes. I hugged her, and for the first time, the word heiress felt true. That night, as Simone and I walked home through the city's velvet dusk, she stopped me at a crosswalk. "Do you feel different?" she asked. I thought for a moment, watching headlights streak across Fifth Avenue. "Yes," I said. "I feel seen. Not for the money, not for the name. For the first time, I feel like I matter because I chose to matter." Simone squeezed my hand, grinning. "You always did. The rest of them are just catching up." Of course, not all the changes were welcome. Power, I learned, attracts not just admiration, but resentment. The more I did, the more I claimed my space, the more some people bristled. A handful of men on the foundation board challenged every proposal, questioning my judgment in tones that reminded me of my father's old friends. "It's a lovely idea, Cassandra, but don't you think it's a little ambitious for someone your age?" I smiled, meeting their gaze unflinching. "Ambition built this foundation. I'm just honoring the tradition." Evelyn, always my silent supporter, sat in the back of the room, her presence a reminder that I was never truly alone. That summer, I traveled to Rome for a fundraising conference. In another life, I might have felt like an imposter, surrounded by billionaires, politicians, and women whose lives seemed effortless. But something had shifted. I stood taller, spoke clearer, and, for the first time, found myself not just invited to the table, but sought after for advice. At a rooftop dinner overlooking the Tiber, a French philanthropist asked me the question I'd been waiting to answer my whole life. "How did you become this woman, Cassandra? So young, so respected, so fearless." I smiled, thinking of my mother, of Evelyn, of Simone, of the little girl in borrowed shoes, and the woman in midnight blue silk. "I stopped letting other people write my story," I said, "and I learned that real power is not in money, but in the courage to use it for something greater than yourself." She nodded, raising her glass. "To write your own story." The table toasted, laughter ringing into the night. The fall brought new projects, new partnerships, and a sense of belonging I'd never known. I co-founded a mentorship program for young women in finance, pairing them with leaders across the city. I funded mental health services for public school students,
started a summer art festival in Brooklyn, and, at Evelyn's urging, finally sat for a magazine profile, telling my story in my own words. The article was called "The Heiress Who Chose Her Own Crown." For the first time, I saw myself in the words, not as a pawn, not as a rumor, but a person, a woman remade by hardship and vindication who had turned humiliation into opportunity and loneliness into leadership. On the anniversary of the gala, I returned to the Astoria Hotel, not as a guest, but as the honorary chair of the new pediatric oncology wing. The ballroom sparkled, the air buzzed with hope, not tension. Simone was there, radiant as ever, snapping photos and dancing with a surgeon she'd met during the year. Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, a proud smile hidden in her usual reserve. As the ceremony ended, a nurse brought over a little girl in a wheelchair, eyes wide and shining. "Are you really the lady who gave us the art room?" she asked. I knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead.
"I am, but you're the artist who makes it special." She beamed, holding up a crayon drawing, a crown, yellow and gold, with my name written underneath. "To Cassie, Queen of the Gala." I blinked back tears, hugging her gently. As I stood, applause filled the room, but this time it wasn't for the money or the name or the dress. It was for a woman who had learned, finally, that the only title worth claiming is the one you give yourself. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and looked out over the city. The world was no less ruthless, no less cold, but it was mine now, mine to shape, mine to soften, mine to fill with the kind of warmth my mother had shown me. I took the crayon crown and pinned it to my wall, next to the peony Evelyn had sent months before. Somewhere in the distance, the city lights shimmered, each one a reminder. You are not what they call you. You are what you do, what you give, and what you choose to become. And I, Cassandra Whitmore, had finally chosen. If you'd told me a year before that fateful night at the Astoria Gala that the entire world I knew would shift around me, that I would no longer measure my worth by a seat at some table or the glint of another woman's stare, I wouldn't have believed you. I'd spent most of my life in the shallows, treading water, keeping my head up only as far as was safe, afraid of the undertow of scrutiny that could pull me under at any moment. But the strange thing about courage is that once you claim it, it has a life of its own. Like the tide, it rolls outward, brushing up against the edges of lives you never meant to touch. After that night, after the applause faded and the city's appetite for new scandal moved on, I felt something inside me begin to settle, a kind of rootedness I'd never known. Still, even as I walked forward into this new life, I found the past trailing after me, not as a weight, but as a shadow, faint and sometimes comforting. There were days in the bright, glass-walled offices of the foundation when I'd catch a glimpse of my mother's reflection in the polished elevator doors, a ghostly echo of her patience, her steel, her gentle certainty that who you are always mattered more than what you have. And on the loneliest nights, I would hear my father's measured voice in my head, warning that every blessing comes with its own cost. In the months that followed the gala, the Whitmore Foundation expanded in ways I could never have predicted. Our annual giving doubled, then tripled, as new donors came out of the woodwork, people who'd once ignored my emails, now eager to lend their names to my causes. Some, I knew, were motivated by nothing more than proximity to a headline, but others came because, finally, they saw what could be built when someone stopped caring about credit. For the first time, I understood why my mother had poured herself into her art gallery, why my grandfather had insisted on scholarships for children of the firm's janitors. The truest kind of legacy is not in the bricks of a building or the ink of a will. It is in the doors you open for others. That autumn, I spearheaded a new initiative, Whitmore Scholars, a program pairing young women from underserved communities with mentors in finance, law, and the arts. It was a logistical nightmare.
There were bureaucrats to appease, egos to manage, and countless details that threatened to unravel at the seams. More than once, board members raised eyebrows at the risk of expanding beyond our traditional spheres. But I stood firm, drawing strength from the memory of my own mentors, my mother, Evelyn, and, in her own way, Simone. I insisted on meeting every applicant personally, listening to their stories in cramped school offices and church basements, learning names and dreams and fears. For every 10 girls who doubted their own worth, there was one who shone, a diamond beneath the dust, waiting for the smallest encouragement to blaze. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of interviews, I sat alone in my office, city lights blinking in the dusk, and reread a letter from a girl named Janelle. She wrote of growing up in a walk-up in Washington Heights, watching her mother work 2 jobs, dreaming of a life she'd only glimpsed in magazines. "I used to think people like you only existed in stories," she'd written, "but now I see that sometimes stories can become real. Thank you for letting me believe I can be one of them." I read her words again and again, letting them sink in. I had been searching for belonging in rooms where I was always a guest, when the truest sense of home was to be found in giving others a place at the table. My relationship with Evelyn deepened, shifting from student and guardian to something more akin to partnership. We fought, often, over the direction of the foundation. She urged caution, I pressed for boldness, but beneath every disagreement was a shared respect, an understanding that the Whitmore name, now more than ever, needed to stand for more than endurance. It needed to stand for evolution. One night, after a particularly tense board meeting, we sat together in the empty conference room, the city spread out below us like a promise. "You know," she said, her tone almost wistful, "your mother would be proud of you. She was always braver than she let on." I smiled, blinking back tears I hadn't realized were there. Some days, I think I'm just pretending, like I'm still that girl on the outside, hoping no one sees the seams. Evelyn reached over, squeezing my hand. "We're all pretending, Cassie. The trick is to pretend long enough that you forget you ever doubted yourself." I let myself lean into her warmth for a moment, savoring the rare gift of being seen, not just as a leader, but as a person in progress. The social world, meanwhile, continued to revolve, albeit with slightly different gravity. There were new faces in old circles, daughters of tech founders, sons of real estate magnates, women with Instagram followings larger than entire school districts. They brought with them new codes, new games, influence measured in likes, charity auctioned off in hashtags. I found myself both fascinated and weary, longing for the days when philanthropy was more than performance. At one particularly gaudy fundraiser, a Casino Royale night hosted by the Barringtons, with fake diamonds as table markers and real caviar at the bar, I watched Chloe work the room, her laughter ringing as bright as ever. She caught my eye from across the blackjack table, and for a moment the old tension sparked. A glance, a raised brow, a question left unasked. Later, as I collected my coat, she sidled up beside me. "You know, Cassie," she said, not quite meeting my gaze, "I used to think this was all just a game. Who had the nicest dress and who sat at the best table. But you made it about something real." I was surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "I never wanted to be the story," I admitted, "but if I have to be, I want it to mean something." Chloe nodded, her lips twisting in a wry smile. "Just promise me you'll never lose that crown, okay?" I laughed, the tension between us finally dissolving. "I think I'll trade it for something lighter, maybe a cause or a canvas." Serena remained at the fringes of my world, her presence more rumor than reality. She resurfaced now and then, at a benefit, a gallery opening, a garden party, her greetings polite but distant. Gone were the snide asides, the sharp-edged humor. In their place was a new kind of armor, brittle and defensive. I sometimes wondered if she regretted our long rivalry, or if she simply mourned the loss of her role as antagonist. One night, ever the optimist, believed in forgiveness. "You should reach out," she urged one night over dinner. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. Because grace isn't just for the people who deserve it. Sometimes it's for the people who need it most. So I did, sending Serena a brief note after a mutual acquaintance's charity event. Hope you're well. The city isn't the same without your wit. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. She replied weeks later, a short but sincere message. Thank you. Maybe one day. I'm still learning who I am without the old script. It was enough. That winter, the Foundation's work reached new heights. We opened a community center in the Bronx, launched mental health initiatives in schools, and expanded our scholarship programs citywide. Each new ribbon cut, each headline, each thank you letter from a grateful parent was a reminder that every act of courage, however small, rippled outward, touching lives I might never know. Yet with every new success came new scrutiny. Critics questioned my motives, my management style, the very legitimacy of my Heiress activism. There were whispers about my personal life, rumors of romances, feuds, and business dealings. At first, I bristled, but with time, I learned to meet gossip with silence, trusting that my work would speak louder than any rumor.
There were nights when I lay awake, replaying old wounds, wishing I could reach through the past and tell my younger self, it's not about being liked, it's about being respected by others, yes, but most importantly, by yourself. Personal life crept in, slow and quiet. For a long time, I'd guarded my heart as fiercely as my reputation. But love, like courage, can surprise you. I met Thomas Avery at a fundraiser for the city's homeless youth, a lawyer with a crooked smile and a disarming sincerity, more interested in listening than in talking. He came from a world much like mine, but carried it lightly, his own wounds hidden beneath easy humor. Our first dates were cautious, conversations winding from art to philosophy to the awkwardness of always being watched. He never asked about my fortune, never tried to impress me with his own. Instead, he asked about my favorite books, my childhood fears, and the small, secret joys that made me laugh. With Thomas, I found a kind of peace I'd never known. Mornings spent reading in bed, afternoons wandering the city without schedule or expectation, evenings filled with the kind of laughter that comes only from trust. He saw me, not as an heiress or a headline, but as Cassie, and in his gaze, I saw the woman I'd fought to become. Evelyn met him over dinner one night, her approval cautious but genuine. He's a good man, she said later, and more importantly, he makes you forget to look over your shoulder. Simone, of course, adored him immediately, dubbing us the city's least boring power couple. We took things slow. There were no paparazzi, no exclusive leaks to the tabloids, just two people quietly building a life that felt honest and real. Spring brought fresh beginnings, a new class of Whitmore scholars, a partnership with a leading children's hospital, and a mural project in Brooklyn that turned blank walls into explosions of color. At the Foundation's annual gala, I stood at the podium once more, looking out over a crowd transformed, not by wealth, but by hope. There were fewer tiaras, fewer diamond necklaces, more young faces, more laughter. I dedicated the evening to my mother, to the memory of every girl who'd ever been told she was almost good enough, almost real, almost worthy. After the speeches, a young woman approached, nerves written across her face. "Miss Whitmore, I just wanted to thank you. Because of your scholarship, I'll be the first in my family to college." I hugged her, blinking back tears. "You did the work," I said. "I just opened the door." Later that night, after the last guest had gone and the city lay quiet, I found myself on the terrace, looking out over the skyline. Thomas joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked softly. "The old world, the parties, the posturing?" I thought about it, really thought. There was a time when I'd have given anything for acceptance. Now, I couldn't imagine trading this life built on substance, not spectacle, for all the borrowed jewels in Manhattan. "No," I said, "not for a second." He smiled.
We stood there a long while, city lights glittering below us, the hum of possibility as steady as my own heartbeat. As the years passed, my name became less of a question mark, more of an answer. There were setbacks, scandals I couldn't prevent, causes I couldn't save. There were nights when loneliness threatened to return, when doubt whispered that perhaps the world hadn't changed at all. But each time, I remembered that girl at the gala, standing in the spotlight, voice steady as the world held its breath. I remembered the fear, the humiliation, the sudden electric joy of reclamation. I remembered that power, once claimed, is never truly lost. And I remembered my mother's words, as clear as if she stood beside me still. What you do is who you are. The rest is just noise. On the 10th anniversary of the Whitmore Foundation's first $1 million gift, we opened a new center, an arts and wellness hub for children battling cancer. The ribbon cutting drew crowds from across the city, old friends, new allies, even a few former rivals. Simone delivered the keynote, her voice bright with pride. Tonight, we celebrate not just a building, but a legacy. We celebrate what happens when a woman refuses to let others define her, when she writes her own story, and in doing so, gives others the courage to do the same.
The applause was thunderous. Afterward, as I wandered through the galleries, watching children paint murals and dance in the sunshine, a small boy tugged at my hand. "Are you the lady who made this place?" he asked. I knelt beside him, smiling. "I had help," I said, "lots of help. But I'm glad you're here. This place belongs to you now." He grinned, running off to join his friends. I stayed there, kneeling on the polished floor, heart full, eyes wet with joy. That night, I wrote in my journal, a ritual my mother taught me, a way to mark the passage of days and the meaning of small victories. Legacy isn't about the rooms you fill, but the lives you change. It's measured not in applause, but in the quiet, stubborn acts of faith that make the world gentler for someone else. I am no longer a guest at the table. I am the table. And every day, I invite more to join. As I close this chapter, I know there will be more battles ahead, more doubts, more doors to push open. But now, when the whispers return, I meet them with a smile, knowing the truth of who I am. They called me a fake. They called me an imposter. They called me almost. But I answered, not with anger, but with action. Not with spite, but with substance. And in the end, I didn't just claim my place. I made one. For every girl with a name no one believes in. For every woman whose crown was forged in fire, not in diamonds. For myself, Cassandra Whitmore, no longer waiting for permission, no longer asking for entry, but building, every day, the kind of world where worth is not given, but grown. In losing what I thought I needed, a seat at their table, their fleeting applause, I found what I truly sought, not their acceptance, but my own courage. The world kept its scales, its quiet questions, but I left the hunger for belonging behind, choosing instead the freedom to walk in my own light. Tonight, I raise a glass, not to the voices that tried to silence me, but to the moment I claimed my place beneath the brightest lights. For every woman who turns judgment into strength, for every girl who learns to own her story, this, at last, is home.